After disgracing himself in public, David decides to take the advice of his good angel, Agnes. He applies himself to the profession that's been chosen for him, but he can't help falling in love again. "You're the guiding star of my existence." Why do you think this utterance, addressed by David to Steerforth, is written as one word? As David becomes increasingly inebriated, he starts to slur his words, indicated typographically by Dickens omitting the normal spacing. The effect is then increased when David blurts out "never better" and "Lord bless her." At the height of his intoxication, he becomes nigh on incomprehensible with "amagaroesu" and finally "guri" for good night. Thank you, drunken David, and guri. As there would appear to have been few noteworthy events in this particular month, I'll fill you in on some general news. During the ongoing cholera pandemic, 52,000 people died in the United Kingdom between 1848 and 1850. And not before time, the University of Oxford started its first degree course in natural sciences in 1850. The sciences, as we currently understand them, had not yet been fully differentiated and were still often referred to under the umbrella term of natural philosophy. In fact, the words scientist and physicist, as well as linguistics, were only coined in the 1840s by the English polymath William Whewell. The composition of David Copperfield appears to have been proceeding so smoothly by now that Dickens made no mention of it in his correspondence during the entire month. Instead, his attention was focused on his new weekly magazine, the first ad for which appeared as a tipped-in slip in this month's part. You'll see that even though the first issue was due to appear in March, there was, as yet, no title. His first idea was to call it The Shadow, but at the end of January he proposed to John Forster that it should simply be called Charles Dickens. He was already receiving articles for the journal and encouraged Elizabeth Gaskell to become a contributor, which she duly did, publishing Cranford and North and South in Household Words, as the weekly miscellany was finally called. Let's take a look at the names by which the narrator is referred to by other characters in this part. For Agnes, he is formally T. Copperfield, Esquire, but she addresses him in person as Trotwood or Trot, the name given to him by Aunt Betsy. Both Tommy Traddles and Mr. Micawber call him Copperfield, the bare surname, an informal style of address, man to man, that was also used, boy to boy, in British schools throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. For Uriah Heep, the title that should precede David's surname is an excruciating matter of etiquette. "Oh really, Master Copperfield," he rejoined. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Copperfield, but the other comes so natural." Uriah's deliberate ambivalence revolves around questions of relative age and status and the nature of their relationship. Master is deferential, but also suggests David's youth, whilst Mr. suggests both manhood and equality between them, which the humble Uriah pretends he can't imagine. And are they friends, acquaintances, rivals, or sworn enemies? Watch how the relationship and mutual namings develop. But we mustn't forget Mrs. Krupp, for whom her lodger was always Mr. Copperfull, explained by David like this. Firstly, no doubt, because it was not my name, and secondly, I'm inclined to think in some indistinct association with a washing day. As most of us have grown up in an era of electrical home appliances, the allusion here may be lost. So, a copper was a deep bowl or cauldron, which might have been made of copper, in which clothes were washed, making a copper full a load of washing. And Mrs. Krupp was responsible for doing David's laundry. The first page of the Advertiser promotes a new journal entitled The Lady's Companion at Home and Abroad, edited by Mrs. J.W. Loudon. This figure was the multi-talented Jane Wells Webb Loudon, a personal friend of both Thackeray and Dickens. She popularised gardening for women, something that would have appealed to Betsy Trotwood, and published a very well received early science fiction novel in 1827 entitled The Mummy. Set in the 22nd century, it imagines surgeons and lawyers as steam-powered automatons, and it even hints at a type of primitive internet. The journal concentrated on practical domestic skills and general knowledge about the world, rather than the genteel accomplishments which Dora would have acquired at her finishing school in Paris. She, for one, should definitely have subscribed to this journal, which was the forerunner of modern women's magazines. Both of this month's plates depict aspects of David's entry to polite society and characters who featured in earlier stages of his life. Here he is presenting his old school friend Traddles to Agnes at Mr. Waterbrook's dinner party, with Uriah Heep lurking in the shadows. And this is the decisive moment when David is introduced by Mr. Spenlow to his daughter and her unlikely chaperone, Miss Murdstone. I heard a voice say, "Mr. Copperfield, my daughter Dora, and my daughter Dora's confidential friend." It was no doubt Mr. Spenlow's voice, but I didn't know it, and I didn't care whose it was. All was over in a moment. I had fulfilled my destiny. I was a captive and a slave. I loved Dora Spenlow to distraction. She was more than human to me. She was a fairy, a sylph. I don't know what she was. Anything that no one ever saw, and everything that everybody ever wanted. I was swallowed up in an abyss of love in an instant. There was no pausing on the brink, no looking down or looking back. I was gone headlong before I had sense to say a word to her. Mr. Spenlow describes the occupation of a proctor, for which David is training, as the genteelest profession in the world. My compound question is, what is meant by a genteel profession, and why might that of a proctor be considered as the genteelest of them all? Court is adjourned until next week.